Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I want to provide an update and analysis on the recent US airstrikes against Iran-backed groups in the Middle East. This comes after a deadly attack against US troops in Syria last week, which was blamed on one of these Shia militia groups aligned with Iran. The US is vowing that more strikes could follow as it seeks to deter further attacks. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get right into it. Background information. Last Monday, rockets struck a base in eastern Syria known as Green Village where U.S. troops are stationed. One U.S. service member was killed and several others injured. The U.S. blamed the attack on Iranian-backed militia groups. Then on Tuesday night, the U.S. conducted airstrikes on facilities used by these groups along the Iraq-Syria border. According to the Pentagon, these strikes targeted ammunition and logistics facilities used by groups like Kataib Hezbollah and Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada. Dozens of fighters were reported killed. On Sunday, the U.S. conducted further strikes targeting Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. These came in response to Houthi attacks on shipping vessels in the Red Sea. The U.S. and Britain said they targeted 36 Houthi sites in precision strikes intended to degrade their capabilities. However, the Houthis have vowed retaliation, warning they will meet escalation with escalation. So in the span of a week we've seen the U.S. military launch strikes across three countries: Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, going after Iranian proxies and partners. This shows how committed the U.S. is to pushing back against groups it holds responsible for attacks against its personnel and interests in the region. Analysis of strikes. Clearly these strikes are meant to send a forceful message that the U.S. will not tolerate attacks on its troops and will retaliate decisively. The strikes were also likely intended to deter further aggression. By raising the costs, the U.S. hopes to curb future incidents. However, some analysts argue that while limited strikes may be tactically effective, they don't really change the strategic landscape. The core tensions remain between the U.S. and these Iran-backed groups. They have fundamental differences and compete for influence in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere. Limited strikes alone don't resolve these deeper issues. Critics also point out the risks of escalation. Hardline elements may see the strikes as an excuse for retaliation. Groups like Kataib Hezbollah have vowed to seek revenge for killed fighters. Tit-for-tat strikes and counterstrikes could lead to a dangerous spiral. So while the U.S. intends to de-escalate, its actions could have the opposite effect inadvertently. Broader context. Zooming out, these events are taking place against the backdrop of ongoing efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal. After former President Trump exited the agreement in 2018, Tehran has taken steps away from its commitments. Diplomats are still working to negotiate a U.S. return to the deal, but talks have stalled in recent months. Some analysts argue that strikes at this time actually undermine prospects for diplomacy. They empower hardliners in Iran who oppose concessions. However, U.S. officials counter that the strikes are fully justified self-defense against ongoing threats. From their perspective, deterrence and diplomacy go hand in hand. Others note that Iran may be implicitly giving these groups a longer leash, letting them step up attacks to gain leverage in the nuclear talks. Therefore, U.S. strikes are meant to extinguish this pressure and make clear it won't impact negotiations. So the strikes have implications far beyond tactical retaliation. They relate to broader U.S. strategy vis-a-vis Iran and attempts to restrain its regional proxies. The two countries remain locked in a tense standoff even as they negotiate over core issues like the nuclear program. Potential for escalation. The pressing concern now is whether we will see further escalation in the weeks ahead. The Houthi warning of retaliation is worrying. While they lack capacity for direct strikes on the U.S. homeland, they could target U.S. warships or regional bases. Their threats should be taken seriously given their drone and missile capabilities. Meanwhile, Iraqi militias have vowed revenge over the deaths of their members in the Syria strikes. They could look to strike U.S. forces or diplomatic facilities in Iraq in response. There are concerns this could reignite a spiral similar to 2020, when militia attacks led to U.S. airstrikes, followed by protests and embassy siege. To avoid this outcome, the U.S. is signaling it does not seek further conflict but will continue meeting threats with proportional force. Much will depend on how Iran reacts and whether it tightens control of regional proxies. Tehran's response may in turn hinge on progress or setbacks in nuclear talks. So the situation remains quite complex and volatile. There are risks of miscalculation that could prompt an unintended escalation. Diplomacy will be needed alongside deterrence to find off-ramps and prevent worsening clashes. The coming weeks will be critical. Conclusion. In closing, the latest U.S. strikes highlight how tensions remain high with Iran and its partners across the Middle East. Though limited in scope, the strikes carry risks while seeking to establish deterrence against attacks on U.S. personnel. Going forward, active diplomacy will be just as vital to resolve differences and avoid an uncontrolled spiral. The path ahead remains uncertain. We will have to watch closely in the coming days and weeks how this crisis continues to unfold. That's all for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching.